What is your ethnicity?
Oh, I'm Nigerian.
You're one of the first Nigerians I ended up meeting. Describe your culture.
Yeah, so Nigerians are really like more like a proud people. So we come from like West Africa. So there are definitely a lot of tribes in Nigeria. Some of the most commonly known tribes is Yoruba and Igbo, but we definitely have like other tribes in Nigeria. But yeah, we're like one of the giants of Africa. We have one of like the largest populations in Africa, and we've contributed a lot to society, such as like music, such as food, culture, diversity. Like, we've done a lot in terms of like, providing towards like the world, our impacts. So really looking at the whole African culture as a whole, the whole dynamic has changed literally within, I would say, like the past 10 years. So really before that time, the African culture was really just like ostracized and it was really just looked down upon. The problem about like the African community is a very proud community. So they like to go ahead and stand strong. They like to go ahead and like make sure that like all their people is taken care of. But during that time, a lot of African Americans and a lot of Africans, they had like a lot of problems and a lot of culture clashes with each other. So during this time, a lot of Africans, they were having like a lot of trouble and they were looked down upon. They were called different types of names. They were told that they were illiterate. They were told they couldn't do anything of any substance. But as time is going on, the African culture is starting to be appreciated a lot more and started to be incorporated into a lot of society's, benefits to the.
I don't know about you, but I was the oldest in my household. And, when you're the oldest in your household, especially, in an African household, there's a lot of pressure on you. So, are you the oldest in your household?
Yeah, I'm the firstborn.
Okay. What are some things that you could describe to me?
So really, like you said, like when you're the oldest, you really have the most pressure on you. You really have to go ahead and be that star for your family. So growing up in a household, there's only like me, my brother, my mom, and my dad. So at the end of the day, there's only two children. So for the family to go ahead and feel like they've succeeded somewhere, it's like we have to feel like we're doing something right. So as the firstborn, your parents are really more harder on you because they want to go ahead and make sure that this project that we're working on, it becomes successful. We want to go ahead and make sure that as we're learning how to go ahead and be a parent and how we're learning how to go ahead and raise our child in this country called America, we want to go ahead and make sure that everything is right. We want to go ahead and make sure to go ahead and consult them and counsel them on everything that they go ahead and need to do in America. So really growing up, it was a lot more tougher on me. There was no such thing as D's. There was no such thing as C's. There was absolutely no such thing as F's. And even B's weren't even accepted. Really in early thousands, even the early 2010s, there was no such thing as like getting anything below excellence. You always had to go ahead and make sure that you stood out. So that pressure of being a firstborn, you always had to make sure that you were on point because you were the pinnacle of the family. You were their first project. You had to go ahead and make sure that everything that you did, it always stood out strong.
Mm. So it's as if like the mindset installed in not just you but us, you know, children of African parents. It's like the mindset was you're the best, you know, you're the you're the best in this household and you're the best out there. And even though we're gonna raise you pretty strict, we want you to have the mindset that you're gonna dominate the world out there. Do you feel so?
Yeah, definitely. Like really like even as like a young African when I was first growing up, like my parents always told me that I always had to work 10 times better than the next person because really in the systematic world that we're raised in, we're always a step below some other people that might have a step ahead. So we always had to work twice as hard. When I first started off, I was one of the most gifted people in my classes, but I was always having issues in terms of like communicating with my teacher in terms of like speaking because I was always speaking out of turn. And that really turned into something to where it was like I was placed in ESOL, which is English, Spanish, oral language, because they believed that I couldn't necessarily speak. So I had a setback. But for whatever reason, luckily, I eventually ended up getting out of that and I eventually ended up going to the gift program where I always had like a higher up in terms of like getting into like honors classes and gifted classes because I always had the talents. And the thing is, it always started from when I was younger. when I was 2 years old, apparently my dad said I was reading newspapers. He said people would give me money. They said they would give me like $1 or $2 just to go ahead and try to read words off of like a newspaper. And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't have to be something to where it's like a child is reading even at such a early age. But my parents had to go ahead and prep me and make sure that I was ready to go ahead and make sure that I'm stood out inside of the world.
So do you feel like our strict upbringing, shapes our decision making and the lifestyles we end up having?
No, definitely, because I'm not gonna lie, when I was younger, the way how I kind of looked at, how my parents really taught me, I hated them for it. And if I would have to be honest, I really despised my parents. I always thought very negative thoughts and was just like, I don't like the way that you're raising me. I feel like you're so strict. I feel like you're putting so much pressure on me and I don't like this. I just want to go ahead and be a normal kid. But to be honest, the way how I kind of look at society right now is that I'm actually appreciative of the way that they've raised me. Like the way they've raised me to be somebody strong in society. They gave me common sense because common sense isn't common these days. Like there are a lot of things where a lot of people need to go ahead and have like a strong upbringing. And luckily, both of my parents were there from the jump and they went ahead and instilled a lot of things in terms of like social disciplines, in terms of just having common knowledge and just general social skills in terms of like how to properly greet somebody that's older than you, how to have respect for somebody that's older than you, how to go ahead and make sure that you go ahead and have discipline to go ahead and study for your exams, how to go ahead and make sure that you're well prepared for the outside world. So even though when I was younger, it looked like they were very strict on me, I appreciate it at an older age now because that put me into the man that I am today.
Name some pros that comes with your culture.
I mean, to be honest, like there's a lot of pros that come with my culture and it really just, somebody can just really just like name off a lot. Like whether you're talking about music, like, in my culture, like we have some of the most prominent music that's really just out here, just even just in general, in terms of like the African scene, or even just that's starting to go ahead and dominate in the American scene. Like in terms of my culture, I love my food. Our food is some of like the most tastiest food and I do love it and I appreciate it. And in terms of just having like knowledge and discipline, appreciate it a lot more as I'm older because the thing about like being Nigerian is that there's a certain expectation of who you are supposed to be as a person. There's supposed to be an expectation that, you're one of the greats, that you're supposed to go ahead and be somebody that's excellent in society. And I appreciate it more now in the modern day that, being Nigerian and even being African is having a positive connotation. And even back in the day, being African, there were a lot of children that used to look at other Africans and used to insult them because of where they came from and used to think that they were less of a person. But at the end of the day, they always understood that as Africans, we were some of the most smartest people in our classes. And now as we go ahead and grow older, Africans are getting more well respected in terms of having knowledge, having the ability to go ahead and do things and being able to go ahead and excel in all areas. So I can really kind of do both. So some things that I don't necessarily like about my culture, I feel like in terms of like, Nigerians, there's always a negative connotation that necessarily comes with them because there have been a lot of jokes that like, a lot of people like to say that like, Nigerians are like scammers or like, there's some type of Nigerian prince somewhere that's trying to go ahead and like, steal somebody's money. And to be honest, I can't necessarily say that that's completely false because even though there are certain areas where they do it, it is definitely very common in terms of like Nigerians, in terms of like scamming. And the thing is, as we are a proud people, there are a few bad apples that are messing up the tree. And that definitely goes and corrupts, the overall look of, Nigerians. And the problem about Nigeria itself as a country is it's very corrupt. And the thing is, as Nigeria is supposed to be one of the biggest nations in the continent, and it's supposed to go ahead and be like the big brother, the country that overlooks all of Africa, the country that everybody's supposed to look up to. There are a lot of corruption that happens on, like we have different situations such as like Boko Haram that happens over there, or we have just like a lot of other events where There are the policemen or the military men that sometimes kidnap people for certain things that people are wearing, whether it's like designer, whether it's jewelry, whether it's a certain type of car that they drive. It's just like a lot of corruption that goes on. A lot of citizens need money. The president is felt to be keeping that money away from the citizens. Electricity is supposed to be running 24/7. The electricity isn't even stable in Nigeria. And the thing is, Nigeria is supposed to be a first world country. Nigeria is supposed to be one of the best countries in the world. But for whatever reason, corruption definitely messes up Nigeria's stronghold in terms of being one of the best countries in the world. So I feel like the best plan for Nigeria to do is to definitely be stronger as a country and to unite and to build itself up better in any hopes of like trying to be like one of the giants of Africa again.
Where would you rank Nigerian food?
Oh, Nigerian food? I mean, I had Nigerian food this morning, so to be honest, I always rate it like a 10 out of 10. Like growing up as a child, I've always had like Nigerian food, whether it was eba, whether it was fufu, whether it was egusi soup, whether it was jollof rice, whether it's fried rice. I've always had, you know, Nigerian food instilled into me. And so even just coming back to Atlanta, even for like these past like 2 weeks, I've had Nigerian food every day because it just brings me back to better times of like where it just kind of felt delicious, to be honest.
Wale, Davido, Thames, and Burna Boy are some of a few Nigerian artists that I could come off, that I could think of from the top of my head. But name a few that your parents ended up growing up on that stood out to you.
So to be honest, there was just like too many artists, and not even just necessarily artists, but I feel like my parents, instead of necessarily like listening to music, they were really just more keen on like Nollywood. And I would say that like, not that I can speak on any like Nollywood actors, even though I can memorize them a lot by face, but I would definitely feel that like in terms of like Nollywood actors, that there are a lot of prominent Nigerians that are like really out here in the world. Like you said, like, you have Wizkid, you have Davido, you have Burna Boy, you have Thames, and we also have other artists like Rema, we have Ashake, we have like a lot of Nigerian artists that are prominent and they're dominating the fields. And we even have like a lot of like Nigerian. We have like a lot of Nigerian actors that are even taking place in like the Hollywood scenes. Like we have Dameson Idris. We have a lot of people that are like even prominent in just like different roles. So I feel like in terms of like where my parents would, I would say like a lot of the Nollywood actors. I feel like those are some of their favorite like Nigerians that were really prominent in like the famous spaces. Oh, I absolutely love sports, and it's crazy because when I was younger, I played basketball, and I remember being like maybe like around like 8 years old, and my parents were enlisting me in like a basketball scene called like LYA Sports. It was like Lawrenceville Youth Association, and we used to go ahead and just like play basketball. But for whatever reason, I think when I first started, I didn't necessarily like it, but I played it. But it wasn't up until I think like 2010 where somebody in my band class they said something like, "Oh, I bet you that the Lakers won't get past the first round." And even though I didn't know anything about basketball, I knew who Kobe Bryant was, and I was like, "Yeah, no, I think Kobe Bryant can go ahead and do it." And Kobe Bryant went ahead and did it. So not knowing much about it, that really was the catalyst to go ahead and start getting me into sports and even football. Like, I never watched football, but one day I was just like, apparently today's a Super Bowl. Let me turn on TV. Let me just watch football, even though I had no idea what it was about. And after that, I just completely fell in love with sports.
So, do you know?
Of course,
Okay.
he was like the second round pick of like one of the drafts.
So he had a father that was very strict when it came to academics, to where like back when Victor Oladipo was in high school, his father didn't attend much of his games. It carried on to the college level, and he finally attended Victor's first NBA game when Victor Oladipo was an All Star, I believe, the year of 2021 or 2020. The reason so was because his father was very strict and valued academics. He wanted his son to pursue academia. He didn't really feel like sports would be able to rake in, you know, stable income until I guess he accepted his son's talent and realized that, this is my son and I gotta accept, that this is something he wants to do. What's your take on that?
Oh, I feel like at this point we're at a different time in society, and we're not in the old days of society. And I feel like in terms of, I would say like the newer generation of parents, I would say that like, I would hope that they would be a lot more acceptant of a lot of things that are going on in society in terms of different ways to go ahead and make money. So for example, like I know there are a lot of influential people that necessarily they look at maybe a career path that they want to go ahead and choose, but their parents might necessarily approve. And like I said, an example is Damson Idris. He was also a Nigerian man, and he went ahead and told a story about how when he was younger, his parents were just kind of like looking at him like his acting career and was just like, do you think that this is somewhere that you can go ahead and excel in? And Damson Idris is probably like one of the most famous people in terms of like playing into the show Snowfall. And he's made a very good, successful career even off of that as well. And I believe that his parents didn't at first understand exactly what was going on, but as time went ahead and continued, they slowly started to go ahead and understand it. And I feel like at the end of the day, I wouldn't necessarily say that like academics should go ahead and be the number one driver in terms of like maybe where a child can go ahead and excel, because in this growing age, there are a lot of ways that a child can go ahead and excel in society. Like Victor Oladipo can go ahead and be a very excellent basketball player. And I do understand in terms of like keeping academics, in terms of like having a backup plan. But also, if your son is doing well in one talent, I would say try to go ahead and make sure to go ahead and support them in that way. That if that's the route that they feel like they want to go ahead and take in terms of like going into the NBA, try to go ahead and stand 10 toes behind them and make sure to go ahead and support whatever dreams that they have, because those dreams will go ahead and end up paying for you in the future.
Outside of having educational installed in you at a young age, what are some passions that you have? For me, for example, is journaling, photography, specifically nature photography. I remember there were times where you witnessed me taking like pictures of like a sunset.
Sunset, yeah.
Yeah. I was into nature photography, and it was through photography that I realized I could eventually model as well. Sports. I have a big passion for sports, just like how you do. So, what are some passions that you have?
I'm not gonna lie, like just like you, I'm not gonna lie. Sports is like one of the biggest passions that I have right now. Like for whatever reason, I'm always constantly watching sports. I'm always watching basketball. I was just watching football earlier today. I was just talking about soccer the other time. Like it's just for whatever reason, I feel like sports is always something that it just always just kind of brings me some type of happiness. Like for whatever reason, if there's a time where there isn't any sports on, it's like, what is there really to watch? But besides just sports, just to divert from that, other activities that I love doing is just like even just like playing video games, even just like talking with my friends, even just communicating with my friends, even just going out. I like certain hobbies like that. I like being active. I like just doing certain things that are just different from like what a lot of people like to do, because at the end of the day, we only have one life. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we're active. We want to go ahead and make sure that we're like, outside. So I would say like those are like some of like my favorite hobbies.
We discussed Travis Hunter. He was a well-known five-star recruit coming out of high school. Let's say that was you. Would your parents be supportive of your goal to play professional football or basketball?
To be honest, I feel like at the time where I was in high school, I don't think my parents would be supportive. And even though there was a lot of backing but behind Travis and there was like a lot of schools wanting to sign, they wouldn't necessarily be supportive of the fact that this would be the number one thing that my son would do, because my parents really believed in education above all other things. They didn't care what you were doing. They cared about education. For example, like my brother, he played varsity in high school, and my parents, they didn't necessarily care that he played varsity in high school. They said, you better make sure that your grades are good. And we need to make sure that your grades are good, because that's all they cared about. So I feel like if I was in the Travis Hunter situation where I was maybe like a very highly recruited person, and it was a situation that can go ahead and maybe like bring me to a collegiate level where I can go ahead and play college ball, or even go further and go ahead and play on like the NFL. my parents wouldn't necessarily understand all of that. And for whatever reason, they wouldn't tell me to necessarily focus all my talents on football at that point, knowing what it could bring in the future. They would just go ahead and just tell me to go ahead and focus on my education. So it's a little tricky zone right now, but I feel like my parents would now understand it. But at the time where I was in high school, my parents would not understand it.
Describe some funny moments where you were disciplined for something you were directly or indirectly involved in school.
Oh, in school? I mean, to be honest, when I was in elementary school, I was a bad child. I was a very, very, very bad child. Like I have too many stories to tell, but I remember one time, like there was one time I think a girl, I think her name was like Esmeralda or something like that. I don't even remember her name. And I think we were like in the fourth grade, and I think she brought like a gum to school, but it was a taser gum, and she allowed me to borrow it. And I was just like, okay, cool. Maybe I want to go ahead and prank some. Apparently, I pranked the wrong person, and I went and got in trouble by the teacher. And they sent me to the principal's office where they sent me to ISS. And then my parents then came to the school to try to figure out what was going on. And then the principal ended up tasing herself with the gum. And then so the principal just like, yeah, your son tased me. So my mom is just, yeah, no, so my mom is just looking at me like, okay, so you're tasing the principal now. And I was just like, yeah, I didn't tell her to pull anything. I don't know why she would pull it. So then when I went home, I got a healthy whooping. I got a very, very healthy whooping. And that's not even including all the times where maybe for whatever reason I would have Pokemon cards. I would get them from like other kids at school, and I would have Pokemon cards. And I was like, yo, can I borrow your Pokemon cards? I want to look at them. Even though it was weird. As a child, it was weird to just like borrow Pokemon cards. And they were just like, yeah, that's cool. So they would let me borrow the Pokemon cards. And then I would put them in my bag. And then I remember one time, I don't even know if I should tell it, but I remember one time I came home and then my dad stopped me right at the door and said, give me your book bag. And I'm just looking at him. I'm just like, I'm like, what? And my Pokemon cards were tucked into like the side pocket. And I was just, yo, please don't, please, like, if you go through my bag, yo, please don't go through the side pocket. Open up my bag, turn everything upside down, dumping all my books, dumping all my notebooks on the floor and stuff like that. I said, yo, please don't open up the side pocket. He opened up everything but the side pocket. I said, thank God. Then he opened up the side pocket and he saw the Pokeball card. He said, what is this? You bring this demonic stuff into my house? You bringing this demonic stuff into my... And he threw the stack of Pokemon cards at me and I stumbled back and I fell through a glass table. I don't know. It was like 60 or something like that. And I fell through the glass table. And I remember I was sitting in the frame with like my legs up and my arms up, and I was just staring at him, and he was just staring at me, and we were both quiet. And then he was just looking at me. He was like, "Get up. You know what? Sit down on the floor. Put two hands up. Put two legs up." And I was like, "Yo, this is the worst punishment." So I still my butt. I ain't gonna lie, my butt has never recovered the same again because I did it for at least like 2-3 hours straight. So yeah, no, there was definitely some punishments when I was a child.
What does passion mean to you?
I feel like passion just means like, kind of like a self drive to like, what you feel like is personal to you. So I feel like whatever you have, any type of like self drive towards any type of like meaningful goal or like, anything, I feel like that's really what passion is. Like, so for example, like, I really wanted to be in the medical field, and I always had a passion to go ahead and help people, like not necessarily in just like a customer service type of way, but just in like a health way. Like one of my earliest passions was to like become a pediatrician because when I was younger, there was like a lot of kids that like they always like to like play with me. They always like to like be like, oh, hey, uncle, and this and that. And I always thought, I was like, you know what? I always want to help out the little kids. I always want to make sure that like, they're okay. So I always had a passion to go ahead and, be somebody that can go ahead and take care of them. So when I was in high school, I was like, you know what? When I go to college, I'm going to go ahead and get a major in biology. That way I can go ahead and study pre-med and go to med school. So that way I can become a pediatrician. So that way I can go ahead and like, take care of the kids because I want it to be for the kids. So I always had a passion for medicine because of that reason. And it was that one goal of just being connected to something that I felt like went ahead and grew into something bigger.
What's the difference between being passionate in something versus, coming from a culture that forces you to be involved in a field that you eventually end up somewhat liking, but not really being passionate in?
Yeah, so the thing about being passionate is just really just finding your own interest in something. And I feel like really in the culture where I'm growing up in, whether it was like necessarily if you want to say if it's an African culture or whether it's just like, a Nigerian culture specifically, there are a lot of, influences in terms of like, what you should do as a future. And the thing is, I feel like in terms of like passion, somebody should want to go ahead and like reach towards that passion. Like if somebody wants to go ahead and become a doctor because they want to go ahead and help somebody, they should go ahead and become a doctor because they want to help somebody. Not necessarily because their mom says that they want them to become a doctor because there's no one in the family to go ahead and become a doctor. And I think that's just like the main thing about it, because at the end of the day, whatever somebody has for themselves is going to become ultimately what's going to drive their happiness in the future. So even if I can speak from like a personal experience, like my brother is in the Marine, and when he was my age, when I was like 18 and I started college, my mom was definitely just like on the side of like where it's just like, oh, well, your brother's doing pre-med and, he's studying medicine. Do you want to go ahead and do that too? There's a lot of pressure. So my brother was just like, you know what? I think so, because my mom is a nurse. So when he first started and he enrolled in school, he was pre-med and he was, at school. But after his like first year, he was just like, you know what? This isn't for me. I don't want to do pre-med. So he was just like, all right, cool. Let me go ahead and try to maybe do nursing instead of pre-med. He went ahead and did nursing and completely quit it. And he was like, you know what? After that, I don't even think I want to go to school right now. My mom fell down on her knees and started crying. She was, because my mom, she valued education. She was just like, yo, please do education, do nursing. Nursing is a good support for you. You need this. My brother's like, I just don't see myself in there. I want to join the Marines. My mom started crying tears because of the negative stigma that she feel like is associated with Marines in terms of like getting shipped off somewhere and maybe potentially not coming back. So at that point, my mom wasn't necessarily supportive of my brother's dreams in terms of like being a Marine, but my dad understood it and he was just like, necessarily, even though education is very important, there could be a different route in terms of how you go ahead and approach what you want to go ahead and do for your life. So after my dad supported it, my mom then eventually supported it. He became a Marine and my parents became the proud parents of Marines. Everywhere they go, they say my son is a Marine. So now they love it. And now, instead of my brother now wanted to go ahead and pursue anything in medicine, he's now diverting into like different fields, whether it's cybersecurity or whether it's computer science, where he's trying to go ahead and finish up his degree. And now my parents are still adamant about him finishing up his degree. They're now understanding the fact that necessarily somebody doesn't have to be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or a nurse to go ahead and be successful in life. They're now starting to understand that, okay, maybe computer science, maybe cybersecurity, maybe something else can go ahead and be done to go ahead and be successful.
Do you remember? I can't get his name right, but do you remember the Asian guy from Hangover?
Is that Wong or something like that?
Yeah,
So,
John. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but I did my research on him, and he's a doctor.
yeah, he's a doctor in real life.
And um, do you see yourself potentially going that route where when you become that pediatrician, that successful pediatrician, do you see yourself pursuing other passions outside of medicine to where you're still a doctor, but it's like, all right, let me see what else I can do now that I please my household?
So to be honest, I feel like, as a doctor, you can definitely always have like different types of incomes and stuff like that. And to be honest, I'm not necessarily sure exactly which route I might go to, but I've already seen it starting to work out for like a lot of other people. Like I've seen some people and a lot of other influential people that have been like on Instagram or whether it's like Twitter or whether it's TikTok, where sometimes they record what they do in their own field and they're just like, this is like the life of like a daily doctor or this is like the life of myself. And they become expanded because of social media and because of my own personal antics. I'm not necessarily sure exactly if I were to go ahead and do anything in social media, but I would definitely go ahead and make sure to love to go ahead and maybe try to invest in something, even just besides just like the medical field and get into like any other areas. And I'm not necessarily sure if it is about acting because I'm not necessarily sure how good I am of an actor, and I'm not like the best musician in the world and stuff like that. But only time can go ahead and tell like what side activity I feel like I might do that I feel like can contribute to like my other professional life.
Before I started podcasting, many people looked at me and were like, I should model, but I never took it seriously. And now it's to the point where like it's a field that I'm gonna dive into eventually. I don't know when, but it's something I plan on diving in. You sitting down for this interview right now, I can tell that you can be a great actor. You have the qualities of a good actor. Is that something you see yourself diving into? Just like how certain people looked at me and were like, you'll be a good model. And even though it wasn't something I considered right away, I eventually see what they were saying. So by me saying that you make a good actor, is that something you'll consider eventually?
I mean, I could. I'm not gonna lie. Like, there was a set that they did like in Lawrenceville, and I think it was called like Doom Patrol, and they were doing it in downtown Lawrenceville. And I remember one time I was just like, I don't know what this is, and it looks like they're shooting a set. So I was just like, you know what? Let me go ahead and like try to like sneak on set to see exactly what they're talking about. And I snuck on set, and they were just like, okay, we don't know who you are, but we need you to run down this scene so that we can go ahead and get the shot. And I was just like, okay, cool. So I found myself sneaking into like one of like the shows, but it didn't get played. But what's it called? Power. I think Power Book 4. It's called Force and stuff like that. I started to see myself starting to apply for like certain different roles, and I did end up being in like one of the roles. And even though the episode isn't released yet because the season isn't out yet, like I saw myself actually like kind of like participating in terms of the show, and I'm not necessarily sure if I'm like an actor that could be somebody that can memorize roles and verses and lines, but I definitely probably could see myself maybe potentially acting in the future.
Are you a current medical school student?
Oh yeah, I'm in medical school right now.
So, for those who don't know much about the field, tell me the pros and cons that comes with that field. For those who are completely outside.
So if you're in the medical field, definitely some of the pros is like you'll probably meet some of the most intelligent people that you probably like met in general. Like, it's a very lucrative field. It's a very competitive field, and there are a lot of people that are trying to go ahead and get to the top. Again, but for whatever reason, like in the medical field, you can probably meet some of like your closest friends. And I will say that because these are going to be some of the people that you can eventually work with, because that's really just like what it is. Like, whatever field that you're going to go ahead and get yourself with is going to be the field that like, people that you're interacting with, they can go ahead and relate. Like, if I wanted to go ahead and talk about like, maybe certain medications that could go ahead and cause like adverse effects, I can go ahead and talk about that with like a friend that I'm in medical school with, because they'll understand. And in life and in my career, it's something I'm going to talk about consistently. So in the medical field, I could definitely say that like, you'll meet someone like, the most intelligent and closest friends. But in terms of like the cons, it's not for the weak. Like, that is a field where somebody has to study. You do not want a doctor where you feel like they've only looked up things on Quizlets. You do not want a doctor that all the information that they got was from ChatGTP. Like, you want a doctor that's very wise. You want a doctor that's well understanding. You want a doctor that's appreciative on how to go ahead and treat a patient, how to go ahead and know how to communicate with their patients. You want a doctor that's, compassionate, they're empathetic, they're sympathetic to your feelings. They understand how you are as a regular human. And the thing is, in this field, it's definitely very competitive, and a lot of people that are very well, equipped with knowledge, they don't necessarily have those factors to go ahead and be a doctor. So it's definitely like a lot of hurdles, definitely like a lot of challenges that somebody has to go ahead and have, because at the end of the day, you carry these people's lives in your hands. So it's definitely not for the weak. You definitely have to be smart. You definitely have to go ahead and be understanding for a patient. So I would say that like those are probably like some of the cons, but at the end of the day, there's definitely like more pros than cons, because at the end of the day, you're saving somebody's life and you're being helpful to somebody. You're being helpful to society. Like, without doctors, there wouldn't be a lot of things going on right now, because there wouldn't be a lot of vaccines. There wouldn't be a lot of shots administered. There wouldn't be a lot of surgeries. So, yeah.
When you become a pediatrician, let's say you just saved a child's life and you're heading home. What's your reaction?
So even when I've rotated in the pediatric clinic, when I used to work at the pediatric clinic in Chicago, like there was so many instances where I felt that like I actually did something that was actually beneficial to their lives. Like there was a lot of situations where maybe like a kid came in with, a stomach bug, but it was up to me to go ahead and diagnose. And while I was sitting there taking the history of the child, I was just asking him certain questions. He was telling me certain things, and I was asking his mother, and I was like getting some of the information from his mother. And then, coming together with my own knowledge, I felt like, okay, I can piece together exactly what I feel like is going on. I believe this is what was going on. And when I went to the doctor went ahead and confirmed my diagnosis. It was like, you know what? What's our plan to do? And I was like, I believe we should administer antibiotics. And they said, that's correct. So we went ahead and administered antibiotics. We sent the child on their way. They came back a week later and they were just like, I'm feeling completely better. And that made me feel like I was doing something in terms of helping the child, because the child had already been feeling sick for like a few days and didn't necessarily know what to do. So it kind of made me feel that like, my own impact in terms of like giving advice and knowing how to diagnose somebody, it would be, beneficial to the world. And even another situation where there was a child, and I don't want to necessarily, speak on, their condition because of HIPAA, but the child didn't want to talk to anybody. They didn't want to talk to the doctor. They didn't want to talk to their own mom. But for whatever reason, the child just came up to me and they just hugged my leg. And I was just like, so the child doesn't want to hug, her own mom, but she wants to hug me. Like, why does she want to hug me? And everybody in the room was surprised. And the mom was just like, you remind her of her uncle. Like, she looks at you like, you're her uncle. She won't let anybody go ahead and take her temperature. She won't let anybody go ahead and, take her weight or her height. She won't let anybody hold her, but she'll go ahead and let you hold her. So I feel like, even just doing certain things and being in the field, making sure to go ahead and take somebody. If I were to go ahead and save a child's life, if I were to go ahead and make sure that the child is healthy, I feel like that would go ahead and like make me, feel better about being a good person in this world. And, that will go ahead and drive my passion even more in terms of like, making an impact in society. So
I know this is going to be a crazy statement that I'm about to make, but would that feeling be equivalent to winning Finals MVP?
Finals MVP? Man, I'm not LeBron. I'm not gonna lie. If I was LeBron now, like, well, I mean, to be honest, I feel like it would. And to be honest, like if saving a child's life could, be something that like could be beneficial to this world, I feel like every time I would save a child's life, I would feel like the Finals MVP, and I'll probably like be in the back just raising my hands up, like I probably put a banner up in the rafters, so I could say that. I might not be LeBron, but I feel like every time I were to save a child's life or anybody's life, I would feel like a Finals MVP.
How big is your faith on becoming the next healthcare provider?
So to be honest, like I said, like when I was like in high school, like I always knew that like, I would try to go ahead and dive deep into like the medical field. And I feel like I really want to go ahead and like get closer like with this passion. Like I really want to go ahead and like incorporate it like with myself. So I think really like my passion in terms of like becoming, somewhat deeper into like the medical field, I think it's just like, a 10 out of 10. I think it's something where it's just like, something that I'm building on every day. Like whether it's just like even just doing like, practice questions or like learning certain things that's going on, like whether it's like in surgery or it's OBGYN or it's just like, emergency medicine. Like it's just always something to where it's like, I'm always challenging myself to go ahead and learn more. So that way I could potentially be like, maybe like one of the greatest physicians to like, even just be in the field. And every day it is always going to be like a type of challenge because medicine is not an easy field, but I always like to challenge myself every day to go ahead and make sure that like I'm on top of everything.
So med school students are extremely busy individuals. So how important is church to them or the specific religion that they follow?
So to be honest, the medical field is just is I'm not gonna say it's necessarily like a cruel field, but I would say it's like a field that can somewhat be like understanding, but also somewhat like, non-understanding of exactly what what you got going on. So like where I am practicing, like, my rotations at in Chicago, there are, certain rotations in certain places that you can actually request being able to go ahead and like, taking time off to go ahead and attend church. But some of them, they don't necessarily like, they're not necessarily accepting of, if you're like, I need to go ahead and like, maybe go to the church or go to a mosque or go to the temple, on Sundays, because at the end of the day, medicine doesn't rest. At the end of the day, if there's a patient that needs your help and it's like 11 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, it's just like, as a doctor, they expect you to go ahead and be there because you're supposed to go ahead and be able to go ahead and provide any type of support for them and maybe potentially go ahead and save their life. So that's why I would say like the medical field is definitely like kind of like a battling field, because this is not like a regular shift. This is not like a 9 to 5 working Monday through Friday. This is something where it's just like, if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody's having like appendicitis and they're having like a ruptured, or they're having like a ruptured, like, appendix, if they're having like cholecystitis and they're having like problems with their gallbladder, they need emergency intervention right there. So I think it all just depends on your field. Some fields, they can go ahead and maybe give you those days off, like give you Saturdays and Sundays off. And there are some fields where it's just like you have to probably consistently work no matter what time it is. So I would say that like if there was a situation in the medical field where somebody couldn't necessarily attend church or attend a mosque or attend a temple, is to go ahead and keep their faith with them at all times, because it's not necessarily about like the importance of being in the building for your faith, but making sure to go ahead and keep your faith on you in terms of if you're not necessarily able to go ahead and make it at that point in time due to your job.
There's a lot of doctors out there. And with that being said, there are reviews that come with each of those healthcare providers. So are there doctors out there that have poor reviews?
Yeah, there's a lot of doctors that have poor reviews, and luckily, I wouldn't say I've rotated or been experienced with like a lot of doctors that necessarily had like poor reviews. But to be honest, I can definitely understand where some people would go ahead and have like negative connotations about like poor doctors, because one tip that I heard from like one doctor that I had rotated with, and this was like an internal medicine, but he was like a PMNR, it was Dr. Mataza. He told me that when doctors are looking for who to go ahead and submit in terms of like residency and who to allow into their program, they said that the number one thing that they look at is who is a normal human being. Because apparently a lot of people that apply to residency programs, it's like you could be the smartest person in the room, but for whatever reason, if you're not a normal person and you're not one person that they feel like they could work with, they do not want to go ahead and hire you, because there are a lot of people whose egos are on 10, and there are some people that you just can't stand to be around. They could be the smartest doctor in the room, but for whatever reason, they're the most arrogant. There's some doctors that they're just incompetent, they're just rude, they're just disrespectful. And again, they could be the most talented, but they're definitely having issues in terms of like communications with with patients. And in terms of like just having any type of compassion, just having any type of empathy or any type of sympathy, it's always an issue. And I feel like those qualities that are present in some of like the doctors that are already present or the doctors that are already coming in, those are the ones that are typically going ahead and getting the bad reviews, because at least the doctors that are a lot more understanding, a lot more sympathetic, a lot more empathetic, those are the ones that are a lot more understanding. And those are the ones that are getting the good reviews. But if there's a doctor that's not necessarily connecting with their patients, they always will end up getting a bad review.
So the field of medicine is so challenging that you start seeing those narcissists, those egotistic individuals, that it comes to a point where you start feeling happy when you finally see someone that's normal.
Yeah, like I said, the main part about residency programs selecting their residents is just, choosing who will be a good candidate, who will be a good doctor, because somebody can have excellent scores on all their tests, but that just means that they're a good test taker. Somebody can have great scores. That just means that they probably studied well. But it's like if me and you are having a conversation, how well can we have a conversation based on your interview? How will you have the interviewee and the interviewer, how good they have a conversation is how good that maybe the doctor or the future doctor as a resident can have with the patient. Can I have a normal conversation? Can I talk to you? Can I tell you about maybe an issue that I'm having, and can it seem normal? Or does it look like you're too bland? Does it look like you're too stern? Does it look like you don't care? Those are definitely important traits that they look for. There are some people that, they're doctors, but they're crazy. There are people that is like, you can't allow this person again, like anywhere, because they could be a psychopath, and you don't want that person in your field. You want a person that is just like, okay, I feel like I can connect with you. I feel like I can have a conversation with you. I feel like I'm talking to like my friend. And that's the most important quality I feel like as a doctor to have. Like, can you be a friend to your patient? Can you be somebody that they can console in and tell you about their problems, and you being able to go ahead and solve their problems?
So there are patients out there that wish they had what we're having with their healthcare provider.
Yeah, they wish they could just like sit down and just like maybe like have a conversation. And again, a lot of problems with like what a lot of, doctors are doing in terms of like not necessarily like communicating with their patients is some patients just feel like, I'm here to see you because of an issue that I have. Why is it that like I probably waited 30, 35, 40 minutes, maybe an hour to come see you, and for whatever reason, we only talked about for like maybe like 5 minutes, and you're already sending me out the door with the bill because you already think you already know what's going on, and I'm already out the door. And that's probably like one of the most challenging fields about the medical field, is because a lot of doctors feel like they don't have enough time to go ahead and spare their patients. And because they rush their patients too much and they don't necessarily give them the amount of love and support that they need to go ahead and give them, there are a lot of missed things that are seen. Like, I don't even necessarily want to go into a story that like I probably heard from someone else, but it was just like somebody's family member had passed away because they had went to the hospital, and the doctor has seen the patient and was just like, I believe that you have like this going on. And the patient was just like, well, I don't necessarily think it's this. And the doctor's like, no, it's just this. Like, let me go ahead and give you some medications and go ahead and send you home. And then apparently like the patient went ahead and had a complication and died. And it was just like, if you had maybe given at least like 10 more minutes to be able to thoroughly assess, to go ahead and give the proper exams, to go ahead and give the proper labs to the patient, you would have went ahead and discovered what the issue was with the patient, and you might have been able to go ahead and save their life. But instead, you were too busy in terms of feeling that you could only spend like maybe like 5 minutes or 10 minutes with a patient, and that patient is already out the door. So it's definitely about like, connecting with your patients, learning more about your patients. Some of the doctors that I know, they're just like, oh, how's your sister doing? How's your brother? How's your mother doing? How's your child doing? You want to go ahead and connect with the patients on a personal level, because that'll make them feel like they're more connected to you. That's where they respect you more. That's where the good reviews come to.
How often and how rare is it for a healthcare provider to be hit with a
To
lawsuit?
be honest, like, doctors have health insurance for a reason, so they make sure to definitely go ahead and like make sure to keep up any, like, whether it's malpractice insurance, whether there's any type of insurance, they make sure to go ahead and keep that up. But I wouldn't say it happens too often, but it can definitely happen. And I would say like, maybe some of the most common reasons why somebody will probably be, sued is maybe if any situation, maybe there was like a misdiagnosis, or there was a wrong diagnosis, or there was like any type of situation where it kind of felt like, the patient was probably put in any type of harm's way. And that'll really come in again. Usually those type of situations usually happen when the doctor isn't necessarily paying enough attention or enough mind to the patient. So what I would recommend for doctors in the future is to just, spend some extra time with your patients, make them feel wanted, make them feel, loved. You want them to go ahead and feel comfortable, so that way there isn't any issues with your patient. By the time they leave, they feel like, I feel like the doctor did his best in terms of like trying to go ahead and solve my issue. If you do that every time, there shouldn't necessarily be any need for any type of lawsuit, unless, obviously like the doctor messed up somewhere.
You stated that the field of medicine, is filled with geniuses. So shout out someone that you've encountered during your med school journey that you feel like could have been the next Bill Gates, in the sense of, this person is a genius on top of genius. Someone that just stands out, just shout them out right now. Someone that just, they could have been anything that they set their mind to.
Well, I mean, I obviously gotta shout out like my boy Sean, like, my boy Sean Lazaro, like he's probably one of like the smartest people that I know. And I started medical school with him, and we were literally like roommates, like our first day. And to be honest, like he wasn't even supposed to be in the same medical school as me, because where I started, I ended up going to the medical school because of my own prior failures. And he ended up going to the medical school because of, personal issues. But he was on the road to go ahead and being accepted into like, medical school in American American schools, like here in the United States. But for whatever reason, both of our journeys crossed in Grenada. So in our school where we, had. So I felt that like, every time that I studied, he was always studying like three times harder than me. He was always that type of person that was just like, I need to go ahead and be on top of it. I need to go ahead and make sure that like, I'm on that mountain. And like I said, he's probably one of the smartest people I know. And right now I'm super proud. I'm super happy with him because he's already passed like pretty much all the major tests that he needs to go ahead and pass. And it's just like as he goes ahead and continues to go on, it's like he's already superseded me. He's already like on top of everything that he needs to do. And I feel like he could probably become like maybe like one of the greatest doctors that I feel like I personally know as like a close friend.
Dale, thank you for your time during this interview. As we conclude, are there any last statements that you want the audience to acquire?
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that like, go ahead and make sure to like be true to you. Like, make sure to go ahead and always like focus on yourself. Never go ahead and like steer out of character. Never feel like you have to like be somebody that you aren't. Go ahead and go for your own passions, go for your own goals. Don't let anybody go ahead and tell you like that you can't achieve something that you can't do because anybody can go ahead and achieve anything if they go ahead and put their mind to it. So, if you have any type of goal that you have for the future, go ahead and stand strong. Go ahead and continue going towards it. Just keep being you. Can't say that enough.
Dale, thank you for the interview.
No, I appreciate it.